The orchestrated Hamas-led terrorist savageries on 7th October 2023 was the deadliest attack on Jewish people since Holocaust 70 years ago. It led to the longest war Israel commenced in its history. What started as a hostage rescuing operation soon became a war with the proclaimed goal of destroying Hamas and subsequently Hezbollah, which led to a transnational spiral of violence, leaving tens of thousands dead and millions displaced civilians in Gaza, and rising toll of civilian casualties and urban destruction in Lebanon. Is there a road to peace? To answer that question, on this panel will be Arie Kacowicz, Professor of International Relations and the Chaim Weizmann Chair in International Relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Boushra, Visiting Fellow on Belgrade Center for Security Policy, and Yezid Sayigh, Senior Fellow at Malcolm H. Kerr, Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut. This panel will be moderated by Mr. Branislav Šovljanski, producer at N1 Television.
Yeah, you can take it. I'm going to ask you first, of course. Thank you all for coming and welcome. I hope this will be an interesting panel because it's a rare opportunity. We have someone from Israel, someone from Lebanon, and someone from Palestine at one place talking about the current situation. So I'll start from you, Arie. What do you think where we are now, 1 year since the beginning of the conflict? Are we further or closer to any ceasefire or end of the war 1 year after all started?
Good afternoon, everybody. First, thank you for inviting me, and I think this is quite special that we're having this conversation here in Serbia, former Yugoslavia, where you were 25 or 30 years ago. The question you're asking is very difficult for me as a peace scholar to answer, because until now I got it wrong. I thought that the war would end by Thanksgiving, then Christmas, then Ramadan, etc., and the war keeps going. But I think at this stage, maybe it might be my wishful thinking, we might be closer to a ceasefire because of the issue of ripeness. There is a mutually hurting stalemate, the devastation, the grief, the trauma of both Israelis and Palestinian people, and now we also have a war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is a multi-front war, as the title of the panel says. So at least regarding the Lebanese front, I might be a bit more optimistic than regarding the Gaza Strip, but that might be the case because eventually wars end. That's the case. After war, you have peace. So I believe that we might be closer. Maybe something might happen between now and January 25, an initiative, January 20, an initiative of President Biden in cooperation with future President Trump at the UN, I don't know. But I think we are moving that direction because Hamas has been militarily decimated and it's time to end the war. So, again, that might be my wishful thinking, but that might be the case. Yeah,
but we'll talk about that. Will the end of the war actually end the conflict itself? Probably not. Boushra, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think on the Lebanese front, we are closer for at least a ceasefire than the Gaza. I think Gaza is long. But even in Lebanon, like there are talks actually like in the past 24 hours about like a ceasefire. And it seems that Hezbollah and the Lebanese government agreed on certain points. But then they said that there are certain points that need more negotiation and they need to do this face-to-face with the US envoy. And actually it's about those points, you know, like the devil is in the details. And these points, if they are what the media is saying they are, that it has to do with Israel's right of interfering and bombing anytime they feel that there is a threat, then it's very difficult for Lebanon to accept this because it's interfering with its sovereignty. So we might be close, but not that close. And the coming days will show. And also we need to think about the geopolitical thing, all of it. So there is Iran as well, and would Iran be willing to enter into a peace treaty or at least ceasefire before Trump takes office? So we need to see.
Yezid, what do you think? Are we closer or further from any agreement at all?
Well, I think my fellow panelists have tackled that sufficiently. What I'd like to do is take a slightly longer term look at this. It's been my view all along in the past year that much of what has determined the nature and the pace of events on the ground, whether in Gaza or now in Lebanon, has been primarily the politics and political needs and instincts and agenda of Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. So the question now is, where are those things? Because that's what determines what comes next 2 months and next 2 years. In that sense, I think that Netanyahu both wants and needs continuing conflict for a range of reasons. This means that, although I think, and I agree with both Arie and Boushra, that a ceasefire in Lebanon is more likely than in Gaza, fundamentally, Netanyahu needs war. War is the new mode of politics, his mode of politics. And it's sort of, Clausewitz in the 21st century, war is the continuation of politics by other means, but where we don't go back to politics by other means, we stick with war as politics. And I think for various reasons that I hope we'll get into in the discussion, this is Netanyahu's default mode. So it's not just the far right in Israel pushing him into something, and he's sort of moderating between, the sort of reasonable people in the opposition and the far right. This is Netanyahu's agenda. But fundamentally, this is a political logic that requires more war. And the real question is whether the inauguration of Donald Trump as US president in January will put a hard end to further escalation, specifically with Iran, or not. And that sort of depends on the internal contradictions within the new Trump cabinet.
And what do you think, can the conflict escalate any further, since Netanyahu is repeatedly saying that Israel is in a war on 7 fronts, on 7 different sides with 7 different enemies, all powered by Iran at the end. So can the conflict escalate even more?
You want to come to me
Yeah.
first? I think there's room for that, certainly with Iran. There's a problem here that it's been obvious from the very day after the 7th of October attack on southern Israel that the Israeli government had no end goal in plan. It wasn't clear. It knew it wasn't going to allow Palestinian autonomy in the form of statehood and independence, which has been off the agenda for the last quarter of a century. And it had this dilemma. It didn't want to directly occupy Gaza and the whole population. It didn't want to let them go. It didn't want Hamas in, but it didn't want independence, etc. So we've had a military campaign without a prior political end goal. In Lebanon, it's a bit easier to get that. But for now, Netanyahu, and much I think of the military command in Israel still, think there's something like total victory, which means Hezbollah surrender. Hezbollah's not going to do that. I mean, it's clear, and my sort of what I'm told with Hezbollah as it's reforming, rebuilding, is they have no intention of simply capitulating to what Israel is demanding, which is freedom of action permanently over the entirety of Israeli, Lebanese space, airspace and land. So without that, and unless Israel has some other kind of end goal, how do we end up with a proper, durable ceasefire? So there's this very open-ended situation still in Lebanon, but the big worry, of course, is war with Iran. The question really for me, again, is where is the hard wall that Netanyahu's politics by war hits? It's going to hit some kind of wall. That could be war with Iran without Trump on board, or it could be something else. It's not clear, and I look forward to hearing what my colleagues say. But for now, I think Netanyahu feels that he's on an expansionary trajectory. Right now, no one is forcing him to stop. Israeli domestic politics don't force him to stop. There is no opposition to speak of inside Israel. The economy is not the issue so long as the US helps bankroll the war. So for now, he doesn't have to answer this question.
Yeah, you think the protests on the streets and the people, the families of hostages, asking for those people to be brought home back safely isn't enough? Just short.
I think.
I might
I will come to you. Okay,
I think-
Arie, you can comment on this.
I think that Yezid turns Netanyahu into a kind of omnipotent. And in a sense, from the standpoint of Israeli domestic scene, you know, you can see, for instance, that students of mine, they serve in the reserve for 200 days a year, so they are fed up with that. Right now, that's a different topic, but you know that foreign policy is all about domestic politics. The office of the Prime Minister is facing serious investigations. So in that sense, there are limits to what Netanyahu wants to do. And again, it's not that Netanyahu is like Putin. He has some support, but you should know that 55% of the Israeli public is in favor of stopping the war. So in that sense, it's always more complicated. And I would a bit disagree with you regarding what might be the position. We might talk about that of President Trump. You know, the right-wing parties in Israel, they were very happy with the election of Trump, but he might surprise because he has businesses with Saudi Arabia, because he wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize. So in that sense, there might be some hope that the war has to end, even though I completely agree with you that Netanyahu is Clausewitz's reverse. He wants the war to continue regarding the Gaza Strip, because there is no plan for the day after.
Yeah, okay. Boushra, what do you think about this, about the direction that Israel is going right now with these 7 conflicts, as Netanyahu says?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Yezid was saying. Like, things in the Middle East is like what's domestic is regional and what's regional is domestic. And I think the 3 of us here understand that. So talking about Bibi on one hand, but then also we can look in Lebanon and see like it's also domestic. It's about Hezbollah as well. And then Yezid said that they will not capitulate, and that's true. Like, it's very difficult for Hezbollah to capitulate, because by doing this, they will lose their power in Lebanon. Hezbollah, we should remember that they captured the state, and for like even Lebanon doesn't have a president for the past 2 years. We have a caretaker government. We have a parliament that doesn't convene because Hezbollah doesn't want them to convene and elect someone they don't want. We have an economic crisis shared between the corruption of our leaders and Hezbollah. So generally speaking, Hezbollah has a power over this country, and this also benefits Iran. So would Hezbollah capitulate? Would they lose their power? I don't really see that. And then this is again turned to a Lebanese problem, right? And this is where the Lebanese are really afraid from escalation, like within Lebanon, like for civil unrest or even turning into a civil war with a huge number of people internally displaced and all these troubles. And this brings us back to Iran, and then the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. Well, it's very complicated. Some people see Hezbollah as a proxy to Iran, whereas others claim that Hezbollah has an agency by itself. And no matter which part we take, we can see a rationality for the arguments. And whether Hezbollah is a proxy, then this means that, okay, we don't negotiate with Hezbollah. And this is also what some of the Lebanese leaders are saying, like after all the assassinations that happened for the 3-tier leaders of Hezbollah, then who are we negotiating with? We should negotiate with Iran. But then this means that you're taking all the agency from the Lebanese, including Hezbollah between the brackets, and giving it all to Iran. And then, okay, we just sit there and watch. On the other hand, if Hezbollah has an agency, then what's the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran? And is really Iran not happy with Hezbollah pushing it into a direct conflict with Israel? So this is all need to be taken into consideration when we talk about escalations, and then we can see.
Yeah. Arie, does it seem to you that Israel has a precise or had a precise plan how to get out of Gaza when the war started, and what will it look like when Israel says it's enough?
Well, Borislav, you're asking about Israel, and I would differentiate. As you were saying, the Israeli government does not have a plan regarding the day after. So the default option is that the IDF, the Israeli army, is staying there under military occupation. And what's happening in the last couple of months in the northern part of Gaza is very troubling, because you might say there might be some intention of ethnic cleansing or moving the population to other parts of the Gaza Strip. So the default is a catastrophe. Why is that? Because the Israeli government does not want Hamas to stay there, and I completely agree. Hamas cannot be a governing factor, but the Israeli government does not want the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to get there, and the Israeli government does not want the UN or peacekeeping forces or Arab forces from neighboring countries.
So who's there left?
But wait, but my point is that you have to differentiate, as I mentioned, between the Israeli government and within the Israeli civil society. You know, we have think tanks like Mitvim, that I'm part of that. We have a very clear plan that you can Google. I'm advertising to the audience. You can do the Israeli initiative. And this is a very clear plan what should happen. And I reiterate what I mentioned before, 55% of the Israeli public, they want Israel not to stay in the Gaza Strip. They want either, you know, the UAE or Egypt or a transitional authority, but that's not the case of the Israeli government for the reasons that you were referring that before, because Netanyahu has an intention of continuing the same logic before October 7 of managing the conflict and, in a sense, cooperating with Hamas, continue. So I would differentiate. The Israeli government does not have that for domestic political reasons. Israelis, I think, as a public civil society, we are more sophisticated than our government.
Yezid, what do you think? What's Israel's plan for the day after the ceasefire? Do they have a plan?
Well, for Gaza, no. I think we seem all to be in agreement on that. For Lebanon, I think there is a prospect eventually. But again, I take Arie's critique that the idea that Netanyahu is omnipotent and can go on doing whatever he wants, on the contrary, I mean, I agree. And as I suggested earlier, the real question for us is, where is the wall that his approach will finally hit? Will that come from the US taking a particular position? Will it be fatigue within Israeli society and opposition? Will it be Hezbollah missiles? I don't know. But that he will reach a dead end for sure. What that dead end consists of is unclear. What I'm trying to articulate really is, however, certain political realities and changes. I think there have been changes, and these are ones I'm happy to develop through the discussion. One I'll come back to is that, in my view, I published a blog post just last week about this. The Palestinian national movement is dead. Hamas was the last man standing, and with the 7th of October attack, it nailed the coffin put the last nail in the coffin of the national movement, by which I mean the Fatah mainstream nationalist movement, the PLO leadership, and the PA, the authority. And Hamas has joined the rest. I mean, it's standing, men are fighting, whatever, the name will remain, but it's over. I'll come back to that, but with what I think has happened in Israel, and here's the key issue. Netanyahu might have limitations, constraints. There's 55% of Israelis who want the war to stop, etc. But I'll repeat and reiterate that, in my view, there's only one active, dynamic political camp in Israel, and it's the right, or if you like, the far right. People to the right of Netanyahu, although I think Netanyahu is one and the same. The idea that he's sort of balancing against the far right, I think, is not true. He is part of it. There is no other political force in Israel that has a plan or an agenda that it presents an effective counterbalance. What we're talking about, and again, this is something I've published about recently, I think Israel has joined a number of Arab states. I mean, this may seem very, very puzzling or oxymoronic, but Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, fundamentally what's happened in these countries is not simply that they're in a forever war, which Israel now faces, but that they have been trapped, because the political settlements on which their post-independence states were based have collapsed. The political settlement has broken down in Lebanon and Syria and Sudan and elsewhere. The political settlement on which Israel was established in 1948, I think in many real ways, is also gone. We're seeing a new thing emerging in which the most dynamic actors are hardline, ultra-religious, ultra-nationalist factions. which don't have to be in the majority. They're now following parliamentary politics. They've taken over the state. They're transforming the police, transforming the finance ministry, transforming the colonization effort in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, possibly resettling parts of Gaza. Who knows? That's what they want. But fundamentally, they're driving Israeli politics, even from a minority position. And that is the nature of the right wing as it operates all over the world. And I want here to bring in, this is not just Israel-Palestine. This is what's happening elsewhere, in Modi's India, in East Germany, in Proud Boy America, whether it's white supremacism or Jewish supremacism or thuggishness in Sudan. This is the world we're in, and what's happening in Israel is not different from that. And right now, I think war is accelerating and intensifying the power of this particular kind of ideological agenda.
Yeah. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, Yezid, your prognosis might be right, but then what is the other way around? The diagnosis might be right, but then what is your prognosis? Because, the basic fact, as you might know, Palestine, land of Israel, we are 7 million Jews, more or less. We are 7 million Palestinians. We are not going anywhere. So this Palestine should be free from the river to the sea is an aberration. And I don't know, I'm reading between the lines from your comments. Can Israelis and Palestinians, can we live together under the same political roof? I don't think so. So whether you look at that, even if you're right that you have these weaknesses, you have that in Lebanon, you have within the Palestinian society, within the Israeli society, the only way out of this catastrophe is going back to this idea of a two-state solution, even though we might have a one-state reality right now. Mm-hmm. So you might be right the way you are the expert here of the Middle East, but then we have, defending humanity and looking in policy terms, we have to move what to do to get out of this catastrophe.
Sure. Yeah. So once you mentioned it, the two-state solution, share your thoughts with us. What do you think about that after this war ends, not the conflict? Is it possible still?
Well, again, if you ask me, I'm not representing the Israeli public opinion. I mentioned that. But we can play very, very quickly this exercise. If you ask Israelis whether they are in favor of a two-state solution, Israeli Jews, it will be about 20%, including myself. By the way, the good news, the people in the Gaza Strip, from what I know, they are supporting the two-state solution much more than in the West Bank for obvious reasons. Now, if you frame that question as a package deal that might include normalization, peace with Saudi Arabia, the Arab League, and then an alliance led by the US against Iran, then you will see a 55-60% of the Israelis in favor of that. I know that right now, the problem is not to convince the audience, the problem is to convince my fellow citizens back at home. So I think the two-state solution is the only way for self-determination of both peoples. We Jews, we have our state. Palestinians should have their own. And very quickly, I think that we have to play with new ideas. So there is a refined version of a two-state solution that if peace will come, that might be the version that it's the idea of a confederation. A confederation, like the EU, if you want. Now, you might say everything, as in the Ecclesiastes, everything, there is nothing new under the sun. So the idea of a confederation, part of that, we have that in the partition plan. Those of us who follow that, you know that there was supposed to be two states for two peoples with an economic union, a common network of transport, etc. So this is back to that idea because those of you, if you want to visit the area, it's much smaller than your own country. So we share the ecology, we share many things. So that's the way out. A one-state solution for me, if it's the malign version, it's Hamas or the Israeli extremists, maximalists. And if it's the benign version, I think it's La La Land, Israel's time. And I might confess I'm a Zionist in the good sense. That would undermine the self-determination of both peoples. So by default, I'm not saying it's the ideal thing, but I learned from a teacher of mine, Yoshafat Arkabi, you might know the name, that politics we choose between bad and worse, not between good and bad. The last but option is the two-state solution that I'm advertising here.
Yeah. What do you think, Yezid? Is it? No, let's just ask you. Is this that Arie is talking about even possible right now? I mean, after the ceasefire deal, to talk about two-state solution?
Right now, I don't see any reasonable solution likely. Okay. So let me clarify immediately. I mean, I am on the same side. We had started having this discussion before the panel. I'm all for a two-state solution. I was negotiating it. I had led policy planning for what were called the final status negotiations from 1999 onwards. So I'm extremely aware of environmental, urban, whatever, all the different dimensions we had to prepare for. But I'm talking here about political dynamics in which I look at the last quarter of a century or 30 years of socioeconomic and political change within Israeli society, within Palestinian society, and in the world. So again, what I'm trying to say, not that we shouldn't fight, we have to keep fighting on all these levels, and all these fronts, everywhere we are, because we're all faced with the same threat. Again, I want to say this. I'm scared by where Europe is going, never mind where Israel-Palestine is going or Lebanon is going. But in terms of where we are, where we're going, not next 2 months, not even the next 2 years, but the next 15, 20, I think 30, 50, 60 years, there won't be a Palestine. This is and it has been my assessment going back at least 6 years when I started working, writing an essay about it that I never published. I mean, I want it to be there. I've spent most of my life working for that. It's not coming in my lifetime, I think. Which isn't to say, therefore, I do nothing in the meantime, and that a two-state solution isn't the most reasonable. I'm just not investing much time right now in debating whether it's a one-state, two-state, multi-state confederation, etc. Anything that is reasonable is good. But I am trying to say that right now, the nature of the threat we all face is somewhat different. I would call it the rise of fascism in Israel, faced with, Islamofascism, whatever you want to talk about on the Palestinian side. And every one of our societies is going through this situation. So rather than getting into too much of detail of whether it's two states or one state or, I'm all for that, but I'm not going to personally invest much time and effort into that. I want to fight for, it's not about river to the sea, for instance. It's about equal rights. It's about freedoms, basic freedoms, and it's about fighting various phobias and isms, whether it's racism, anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-Islamic, anti-Semitism, all these antis. I think that's what's really going on in France and Germany, but the liberal centrist establishment makes it all about fighting anti-Semitism, which is wonderfully important, wonderfully good that they're doing this. But I think they're doing it simply to mask the fact that they're turning a blind eye to the rise of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment and Islamophobia in their own societies. And that abdication of the center is what's allowing the right wing to rise in the way it does in Germany, in East Germany with neo-Nazis, with AfD, with Marine Le Pen. And, in 4 years' time in the United Kingdom, if Keir Starmer's Labour Party doesn't deliver, I suspect we're going to have a big backlash the other way. We've already got this in the United States of America, for heaven's sake. So this is where we're at, and we need all to, fight this. So I'm being a little bit very broad, but there's a lot to fight for, and a lot of fights we have to wage. I just don't think right now that, I will fight for Palestine, but right now I don't fight for it because I think it's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm not going to wait for Europe to wake up, nor for Trump to deliver.
Yeah. You wanted to say something, or we can...
Quickly, because it's not nice.
Sure,
she has to talk much more than the two of us. But just, and I know that we have to be careful with comparisons. But let's play for a minute with the case in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. Who would imagine October 73, after that catastrophe, that 4 or 5 years down the road, you will have peace between Israel and Egypt? It took 5 years. It didn't take a generation. The fact that there is peace between Israel and Egypt, there is peace between Israel and Jordan following the Oslo agreement that you were involved. So those are very encouraging news. So My take is that it does not have to take generations. You know, I'm 65, I have a new grandson, I want to see that. So, and it's a question of self-fulfilling prophecy, because the message I can bring from home is that most of the Israelis are completely in a trauma, they are completely in despair, they are completely giving up. And we social scientists, we know if you give up, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So I don't think it has to take 50 years. It might take 5 years, but I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, Boushra, let's speak about the situation in Lebanon right now. Do you think that people there are, as Israelis or their prime minister says it, hostages of Hezbollah? There.
Well,
and can common people, ordinary people, do anything there to change their situation they're living in now?
Well, it depends on who you ask. And I don't think there is Lebanese people, right? I mean, Yezid knows that better than me. I think there is Lebanese peoples. And we need to remember that we are 18 different religious groups and then 18 different visions, if not more, and who's taking hostage who. So, but generally speaking, we can say that Hezbollah for the past 20 years have an upper hand on Lebanon. And then some Lebanese, they are with, others are against. And so basically what the Lebanese who are against, let's say, what they are suggesting with the way that they see things forward, they are saying that there should be a ceasefire and that that Hezbollah should surrender its weapons according to the UN resolutions 1559 and 1701, and that Hezbollah should turn into only a political party that represents the Shia community, and that they should integrate within the state, and that Israel should withdraw from all the lands that it occupied, and then that the Lebanese army should be strengthened and sent to the south, and there should be strengthening for the UNIFIL and an international committee to oversee all the implementation of all these points. So this is what they're looking for. Now, is it going to happen? I'm not really sure. Again, it's about what's the Israeli government going to do? Would they accept to withdraw without having the right to come and bomb anytime they think that they are threatened? And would Hezbollah really agree to surrender its weapons? It's again big question mark. And I just want to build on what Yezid was saying. Yes, we are all in very fundamental crisis, and Lebanon by itself has a crisis like all the other countries that you mentioned. And that's why what the Lebanese, and this is all of them, they agree on, what they want is a rebooting for the system. Like they need to reestablish Lebanon, is to have a new system and to move forward with the country. And because the country is so weak, and it's like there is no way forward with what we have. So rebooting the system is so important.
And this is the question for both of you. Can Hezbollah or Hamas be destroyed or defeated at its roots, like Israeli officials say that, or is it just a story for the public?
Keep going.
Is it just a war propaganda?
Well, I think it might be fanciful, like for Israelis, like, yeah, fancifully they can destroy Hamas, but I don't think that they can destroy Hezbollah, because again, it's because of the Lebanese sectarian system. But like Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese society, and it's part of the social fabric. It represents the Shia community. I'm not saying that all the Shia are Hezbollah. This is not true. Some of them are against Hezbollah, but again, Hezbollah speaks to a big component of the Shia community, and you cannot destroy the Shia community. Those are the Lebanese people at the end, and then you cannot destroy the rhetoric of resistance as far as you're occupying the land. So I don't think that Hezbollah can be completely destroyed, but there should be a solution reached with Hezbollah that at least to surrender its weapons, which I don't think Hezbollah will do again, but some compromise needs to be reached with Hezbollah. Well, with Hamas, I think you're the expert.
I mean, I'm sure we've all read and heard, and a lot of us at least, I guess, accept that you don't defeat a political party that is also a social movement that, articulates, reflects social values, conservative, religious, cultural, and other values of a big part of society, whether that's 20% or 30%. You never defeat that through brute force. The PLO, by the way, the Palestine Liberation Organization, the Lebanese left during the civil war in Lebanon in the mid-1970s, at one point tried to isolate the Phalangist party, the sort of Lebanese fascists, by sort of officially excommunicating them. And that was a totally wrong move, because that party too came from a Maronite Christian milieu and represented part of society, and you could never just eradicate that. Having said that, I think there's just to add a little bit more to this discussion, two interesting features about Israel versus Hamas and Israel versus Hezbollah. With Hamas, this is something I've thought for a few years now, and Arie's comment earlier reminded me that unlike the October 1973 war between Israel and, say, Egypt or Syria, the war between Israel, or Jewish Israel, I mean the Jewish component of Israel, and its Palestinian Arab neighbors is very intimate. It's personal. It's communal. And I've felt for a long time that the nature of the violence there is much more like a civil war than it is a war between different states, different nation states, with their own clear borders. There's no clear border here. And of course, with the penetration of Israeli Jewish settlements into every part of Palestinian territory, except for Gaza in the last decade, that has become a physical intermixing, not simply a conceptual one. And so I think that, unlike October 1973, the potential is different here because, and we see this in the visceral response of many, many, many Israelis, including people who regarded themselves as peaceniks and for the two-state solution and so on, who now just say, I don't like that we're killing their children, but if it's my children or their children, theirs should die. I mean, who said that that is the question to ask anyway? But the mere fact that it's like that shows that it's a very different kind of violence, a different kind of conflict. So there, I think, no, Hamas cannot be eradicated, but the nature of what's going on, Israel exists in every facet of Palestinian life. A baby cannot be born in the occupied Palestinian territories and registered and given identity cards unless the Israeli registrar has approved their registration. There's nothing a Palestinian can do that the Israeli state doesn't have a finger in somewhere. Hezbollah is different, and this is a fascinating thing which I attended the session earlier on other kinds of war and so on. I forget the title of it, and I know tomorrow there's going to be more discussion on this, the sort of evolving nature of war and international humanitarian law. What Israel is doing in Lebanon today, it's fascinating if you think about it, almost without putting a single soldier inside Lebanon, never mind border skirmishes, those are still very superficial. Israel has been able to pick out Shia Lebanese and move them entirely out of their homes and villages, and even their individual homes and apartments and businesses inside Beirut in mixed areas, where a Shia might live next door to a Sunni and a Christian and a Maronite Christian, Orthodox Christian and a Druze. Day before yesterday, 4 rockets hit a building about 300 meters from my mother's home, right? Across the street from a friend of mine who was actually at home in Beirut. And just the shop at the foot of the building was hit with 4 rockets, killing 2 people, one of whom was this Mahdi guy from Hezbollah. And the people around, it's a Christian neighborhood. What we're getting is a form of ethnic cleansing in which you can move an entire community without ever actually controlling the physical territory and making people go through a checkpoint, like, say, in Srebrenica or whatever, sorry, no offense, but, where you have to actually control people's ID cards and say, okay, you go there, and you shoot these ones, you don't shoot those ones, or whatever you do to them, right? This is a fascinating, horrible new form of war, where you can actually say, we're going to war with chess players. And as long as you've got your AI, your artificial intelligence, collecting data for 10 years and identifying all the chess players and who their uncles and aunts and cousins and neighbors are, and who they, where they shop and what supermarket they go to, which is what Israel has done with Hezbollah, to the point where you can then marry that with your precision-guided munitions and chase an entire specific community in the middle of the rest of the population without touching more or less the rest of the population and creating mass expulsion for the rest. It's an extraordinary new world we're in. What the implications are for international humanitarian law, for the laws of war, I think every military around the world right now is reconsidering their playbook.
Yeah. I would like to hear your comment,
Just,
of course.
3 quick comments. One, I would agree, Yezid, that and that's part of the problem, that the Israel-Palestinian conflict it reminds of an ethno-national. So it looks more like a civil war. International wars are much easier to resolve in comparative terms. The second point, the question that you ask, I think that you might try to defeat Hamas militarily, but the idea in political terms is to offer an alternative.
Sure.
And that's what we have to understand. And the third point, which I think it's also relevant, you mentioned, you asked about Lebanese taking hostages. The issue of hostages, I think that the way I frame it's not a conflict, it's the war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So I don't think, in a sense, Hamas has taken hostage the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, using them as human shields, that they don't care how many casualties they have. Then we have the case that right now we have in Israeli government that it's not popular at all. And we have the issue, and I'm carrying that all the time, and we have to emphasize that there are 101 hostages in the Gaza Strip, Jews and Palestinians and some foreigners. And in a sense, the Israeli government has violated the basic social contract. Now, the only way to release the hostages, and that's part of the problem, you have to end the war. But that's the most important thing. Because I would say, and that's, you might say, an Israeli comment, it's the title, you have the multi-front war, you can count, Lebanon, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Syria, Iraq. Now Israel, interesting, is appealing to the UN to condemn the Iranian militias in Iraq, Yemen, Iran. But I think that the greatest threat to Israel is what's happening inside. Back to your comments. That's the major threat. So in a sense, all the free societies in Lebanon, in Israel, in Palestine have been taken hostages by their leaders. And that's the part of the tragedy of that.
Okay. Just a few quick questions at the end of this session, and then we'll hear some questions from the audience. What do you think can Trump re-election change? Can it change anything, any cards on the board right now?
It's going to change everything.
Everything, yeah.
Well, partly because it's a question of, where is Europe right now? Where's the United Kingdom? Where's China? Where's India? These countries have been evolving along parallel paths. They've got, they're also interacting with the global system. And it's previous administrations, including that of Joe Biden in America, which have done things to weaken the United Nations, international legal framework, the World Trade Organization. I mean, these are all, I think, in some cases, not under threat. They're already behind us. They're already collapsed. Already, I think, power actors in the US and elsewhere are already creating the new order or moving on. So Donald Trump, it's not all Donald Trump. Donald Trump is picking up a lot. And of course, he also shares a lot in his agenda, say, vis-a-vis China with Joe Biden. And his own cabinet is full of contradictions. And there are the hawk isolationists who both want to not be involved in the world, but to bomb the heck out of Iran or Hamas or Hezbollah, and the others, etc. So he comes at a time of major shifts in the world. And he's both, I think, an agent of disruption who will accelerate and intensify a lot of that. It's a lot about how other actors in other countries build on that and use it to their advantage or try and block it. So I think it'll make a huge difference. In terms of Israel-Palestine specifically, everyone's sort of betting that Trump wants an end to the war in Lebanon, so Netanyahu had better hurry up. Does that mean he intensifies massively ahead of the inauguration, or does it work the opposite way around? Who knows? Does Trump actually want to deal with Iran, or is he going to listen to those in his administration who want to use this opportunity to end with Iran once and for all? But beyond that, what Trump means for the Korean Peninsula, for relations with Russia, for Ukraine, for NATO, for the World Trade Organization, and for the Middle East, God help us. I mean, but he continues trends that are already underway. This is the thing. Let's not absolve ourselves.
Yeah. Boushra, what do you think? Can he change, and what can he change after he takes the administration in January?
I think Yezid covered it all, and then we hear about him saying that he doesn't want to enter the office while the war is still going, and then exactly what Yezid was saying. What does this mean? Like go ahead and escalate the war further, or go ahead and do a ceasefire before that? But we know that he doesn't want to have a war, at least in Lebanon, by the time he enters the office. But what is the price from now till January 20? And then this is also a little bit scary, because if this doesn't mean a ceasefire, then this means escalating more and more and more. And then there is a window of hell between the brackets from now till January 20. So we will see.
Arie, will Netanyahu have even more power?
I mentioned that briefly in my initial comments, but trying to read Trump is like having the crystal ball or reading the lips of the tea leaves. So here, I'm as an IR professor, I'm very concerned about Trump, to say the least, also in the normative terms that you mentioned before. Now, as an Israeli, if I want to be, kind of egoistic, I would say that's an open question, because Trump designed an ambassador to Israel who's an evangelist calling for annexation, and an ambassador to the UN that she grilled the presidents of the universities. You see, I'm smiling at that, so that's not nice. But at the same time, he designed as the envoy for the Middle East a business person like him. And here, it might work in both directions. Again, things are complicated because we know that Trump has businesses, his family with Saudi Arabia. And right now, at least officially, Saudi Arabia will not move in any direction of normalization with Israel without having an agenda regarding a Palestinian state, or at least in that direction. And the second thing, which I think everything is personal in politics, I don't know whether you know in the audience how Trump got into politics, because he was kind of dismissed by Obama in one of those gala dinners. And you know that President Obama, I have my appreciation, he got the Nobel Peace Prize, I think, in a very premature way. He didn't deserve that. So I think that Trump is out there to try to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And there are only two ways to do that: ending the Russia-Ukrainian war, which I think is more complicated, paradoxically, or ending the wars in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll have a few minutes for questions from audience. First, I would like to hear someone from Belgrade Security Conference, young leaders, if there's someone, so you can pass them the microphone and we can hear the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insight. My name is Dina Abazovic, and I would like to ask a question that is more of that has more practical implications. At this point, it's pretty obvious that there is no effective decision-making that we can have impact on when it comes to the Israeli government. So my question is, do you see any possibility of a grassroots movement within Israel to fight this war? Specifically, is there room for a more left and more progressive approach when it comes to anti-war protests? Obviously, there are anti-war protests right now, but my question is also, is there, I'm kind of struggling to see if there is a possibility to empathize or at least sympathize with Palestinian tragedies and the thousands of people that have died in Palestine, and especially in 6 months, which is 70% women and kids. So to re-emphasize my question, is there a room for a more left and progressive movement that would be more considerate of Palestinian tragedies as well? Thank you.
That's a question for you.
I have hearing problems, so if there are other questions for me, if you can come closer, really, I don't hear my left side, but that's a personal thing. But from what I understood, there is a problem of lack of empathy, to say the least, and trauma. You know, the Israeli society has been traumatized and stick on October 7. And I can go on, and we don't have time to tell you stories. I myself have a niece that she survived the party that, you know, yesterday we started the conference showing that party. She ran for her life for 5 hours. Now, that's not a pretext to demonstrate empathy for more than 40,000 Palestinians killed, the vast majority of them women and children. Half of the population in the Gaza Strip, they are under the age of 18. So that I'm aware, and that's a problem in the sense that both societies, that lack of empathy, as you might find that at the beginning, I guess most of the Palestinians did not believe that Hamas committed that massacre, that violations, and etc. They did not believe. They saw that as freedom fighters. So I wish, for my society, in moral terms, to have expressed more empathy for what happened in the Gaza Strip, what's happening right now. I don't expect that to happen now. That's why we have to stop, as you were saying, start with the ceasefire, moving in a political process to stop what's going on in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yes, here, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Lazar from Belgrade. It was a really nice panel. Thank you for the discussion. And my question is kind of hypothetical, because I really got interested when you talked about Hezbollah and how it represents about 30% of Lebanese people. And I wanted to ask you, if hypothetically you were a decision maker, what would you do about Hezbollah? Because you can't leave it as it is, but you can't really change it to, because it would displease so many people. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Boushra.
Well, I think that we need to remember that Hezbollah is not only a military organization, it's also a political party, and it's also a party with a religious outlook, whether we agree or not. And also, it's a social service provider. So Hezbollah is embedded within the Shia community, and that's why whenever we want to take a decision about Hezbollah, we need to be sensitive, because we don't want to, again, marginalize the Shia. Like again, you mentioned the Phalange, right? So there's like, we can draw a parallel with that. So you don't want to marginalize them, and you need to make them feel that they are part of this country. This country is for the 18 of us. And thank you for this question, actually, because we can open a parallel with the past, and then we can see that the Maronites tried to dominate that country, and they failed. The Sunnis tried to dominate that country, and they failed. And then the Druze tried to dominate that country and failed. And now the Shia, and now it's their turn to realize that they also tried and they failed. What's the price for this realization, and how they're going to come back into the fold of the Lebanese state? This is very, very important. And we as Lebanese have we have like the moral duty, first of all. It is to ensure that they will come into the fold peacefully, and that they are not threatened and they're not marginalized, and that together we need to reboot and to rebuild Lebanon for all of us. This is the most important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, please.
Hello, this is Angel from Bulgaria. I'm a journalist. I work for a Bulgarian news outlet. I should come? Or
yeah, come closer.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Hello. Sorry, everyone. I will impose myself to make the conversation clearer. Sorry. So I'm following up on, I'll have something short for each one of you. First, Israel. I'm following up on the point of whether the war could be ended from downwards up. Is there a societal boiling point? A moment when Israelis, for example, after hearing that more hostages have died, God forbid, will take into the streets in such masses that something can happen that will resemble the judicial reform protests, and that Netanyahu will be forced to end the war. If it comes to Lebanon, we've heard a lot of talk about Europe wanting to help the Lebanese army and hoping that it will perhaps help enforce Israel's security by saying, hello, Hezbollah is not here anymore. Do you think this is feasible, or that it was stillborn when, even in Paris, when they said, okay, we pump a lot of money, but you don't have a proper plan how to do that? And if it comes to Palestine, do you think there is a recipe to save the Palestinian Authority? Because we've heard a lot from the US about revitalizing, re-energizing the Palestinian Authority, but so few people within the West Bank trust it right now that it's blamed for the risk of even further chaos and collapse.
Yes, you can start. So we can go in that order, of course. Arie.
We are very polite. Thank you for the questions. You are very well informed. You know, as I mentioned, and this is very unfortunate, even though I might give you the wrong sense that, you know, I'm optimistic, I'm not completely naive. You know, Israelis, they are exhausted after 30 months of war. So, you know, every Saturday night, we have a Paris Square in Jerusalem next to the Prime Minister's office. So I go there with my Israeli flag. You know, I'm a kind of a patriot, but not many people go there. So in a sense, you know, Netanyahu fired the defense minister. Entre nous, not my cup of tea, but Gallant, you know, he was in favor of ending the war and hostage deal. Now the last news from home, and that's very troubling, Netanyahu is considering firing the head of the security service because the security service is investigating what's going on in the office of the prime minister. So we might come to a point that the legal advisor might decide to impeach Netanyahu. You know, that might happen. As I mentioned, what I'm concerned more about what's going on at home than about the Iranian missiles. It's not that I'm not concerned about the Iranian missiles, but I think the problem is a domestic one. So eventually, that might stop. That's why we started the session when you were presenting a kind of omnipresent image of Netanyahu. The vast majority of Israelis, they don't want Netanyahu long in power. Now, those are good news. The bad news is don't expect that the person who might replace Netanyahu, well, I hope he might be better, but if you consider somebody like the former Prime Minister Bennett, he's even more hawkish than Netanyahu is. So, wish me luck when I'm going back home in a couple of days.
Okay, thank you. Boushra.
Well, this brings us back again to the domestic. And the question is about, like, Lebanese. Yes, they always want a support from outside, but then also the outside wants to see that the Lebanese are doing something. And it's like the dilemma about the egg and the chicken, right? So the Lebanese, especially the Lebanese leaders, they always take cue from what's happening in the world and the international relations, and then they wait. Let's say they wait the Gulf to do something, they wait for France and the US to do something, and then you can hear that the Gulf or France, they're saying, but the Lebanese, they need to do something first. So again, I think that the Lebanese, they need to come together. They first of all, they need to open the parliament. Then they need to elect a president and then do a government and then to decide how they're going to proceed with the UN resolutions and to try to have a talk with Hezbollah as much as possible, and then to strengthen the army and then to send it to the south. So all of this needs, Lebanese shouldn't be left for their own devices, but at the same time they need to take things into their hands. So it's a collaboration domestically and internationally.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Yezid.
I sort of forget the bit about Palestine. The simple answer is the Palestinian Authority functioned very well in the 1990s in terms of setting up a tax department, finance ministry, getting the economy running, doing various things. And in terms of capacities, of core competences, as they're called, it compared very favorably with other Arab countries and with a large number of countries of the global south at least. It was never a problem of capacity, of technical ability, or even of political will. So this whole thing about revitalizing, re-energizing, etc., is dishonest. The question always has been, the problem always has been, since at least the year 2000, the entire 1990s experiment with the Oslo Accords and the attempt to create a temporary autonomy arrangement, which was the Palestinian Authority, was that this was a bridge to so-called final status, when there would be a final decision on whether there was going to be a Palestinian state or not. You're going to have to hold that for a moment. And no Palestinian structure, no organization, no magical leader, no knight in shining armor on a white horse can transform the fact that Palestinians live under various forms of occupation, various levels, various degrees, whether it's West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, or the Palestinian citizens of Israel. In all of these cases, the fundamental problem is they do not control the levers of life that allow them individually and collectively, to exercise the kind of freedoms that the rest of us expect and enjoy in our daily lives. As simple as that. Personally, whether that is a state of Palestine, a state of Israel, I don't care. The point is, you've got millions of people who've been denied this since 1948, since 1967, and even after the Autonomy Accords of 1993. And you can never, how do you get around that? So you bring the Palestinian Authority into Gaza to do what exactly? To prevent Hamas from firing rockets, okay. And then what? Does Gaza have free, open access to the market, to the world? It never did. Does it have free access to, the waves, the radio and TV waves? Does it have free access to the internet? No. To banking? No. To nothing. So what's the point of bringing in anyone to run Gaza if you then tell them you have to run Gaza with none of these things? You could bring the European Commission to take over and see how, Ursula von der Leyen, whatever her name is, runs things. You can't. So this is the core. And the rest is just make-believe, if not downright dishonest and cynical.
Yes, thank you. You wanted to say
Arie,
something?
you have
I just
to
completely agree with you. It was
That's
just
good
a
enough.
question of semantics that they use the term permanent status because, otherwise it sounds something else.
No, but that's the word they use.
Yes.
Final status.
Yes. So,
Not very nice.
But the thing, I'm telling my friends, at home that the fact that the experiment failed, that does not mean that we shouldn't try that again. And I think part of the problem, and you know about that because you were involved, is that this idea, when we teach in international relations theory, Axelrod, that you build like the shadow of the future, you do this gradual. And I think that was wrong because you didn't have the end. I mean, you don't have in the agreements, it was not mentioned a Palestinian state. You have to read between the lines. So you have to start from there. Mm-hmm. So we have to learn from that because, again, the alternative is a catastrophe.
Sure.
So are there any more questions? Just have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Thank you. Maya Bielosh from Belgrade Center for Security Policy. To join you. Okay. Before posing a question that is mostly related to the global movement, I just want to reflect with a few things on your discussion. First of all, what struck me is that you didn't mention the word of peace, because in my opinion, the word of peace is almost erased from the vocabulary of the establishment, the mainstream media, and sometimes experts. We talk about ceasefire, we talk about agreements, and so on. But really genuine peace is somehow neglected. Even those institutions that should be served to safeguard peace and security is no longer fit for it. So how come we ended up in this situation, erasing completely peace and not really upholding to the peace? Because as we speak, people in Palestine, in Gaza particularly, are genocided, and the priority is to stop genocide as well. And the United Nations General Assembly also issued a deadline for ending unlawful occupation, which was supported by the majority in UN. Also recently, global majority supported the right of self-determination of Palestinians as a precondition to actually thinking about their future. What is happening is that...
Can we just hear the question,
yeah,
please,
yeah,
because
yeah.
we don't have any more time.
Whatever is happening in the Middle East doesn't stay at the Middle East and impact us all. And people are reacting to the genocide forming in a form of global movement that is widening. And there is a strong global movement of global citizens standing in solidarity with Palestinians, with Lebanese, but also many other oppressed nations from the global south, demanding peace, demanding global accountability, demanding the new order that will be free from colonial models of power and genocide. For me, is that how do you see the strong reactions toward what is happening? And what is happening in Middle East very much affects us later, because either weapons tested in Palestine, Lebanon will be exported to our country. Police tactics will be important. Spyware will be important to our countries. Models of social exclusion will be implemented, or model suppression to be asked. How do you see the impact of what is happening in the Middle East to other regions and globally? And how do you see global movement that is now more vocal, yet it's met with police brutality and censorship at unprecedented level? How do you see that interaction between what is happening outside of the region?
Okay,
Thank you.
It's a long question, but I will have to ask you to be short, so
Okay,
please.
yes. Well, the context is long maybe, but I think you put your finger on a lot of really important things. And I guess the answer to the issue of mentioning peace or not is what you then described, which is there's a fight ahead. For us to have peace, justice in our various societies, we're going to have to fight, and fight harder than ever. That's one. Two, I think the global solidarity movement that's emerged over the last year in support of Palestine, of course, reflected frustration that for the last quarter of a century, Palestine had not come into being. And so there's a reflection of that, and I think that had accumulated. There are challenges, one of which is that the Palestinian movement itself is not offering leadership, ethical and political. And that was demonstrated, I think, with what Hamas did, and the manner in which many people responded to what Hamas did, basically turning a blind eye to the killing of civilians in southern Israel by Hamas. I mean, I have a problem with that, and I had it from the first day and was vocal about it. But that was in itself an embodiment of the end of real leadership among Palestinians. It's a Palestinian problem. Therefore, the global solidarity movement, in a more proactive way, needs not to look solely to Palestinians for leadership, for guidance, for the compass, their moral compass. I think that because, as you very rightly pointed out, it's not just that tactics and techniques and technologies of repression are being exported from Israel, Palestine to other parts of the world, whether it's in the UK or France or Germany or elsewhere, legislation all over the place reduces the scope for dissent and for protest. Having a demonstration in Amsterdam became in itself something that was, illegal, unless whatever terms. So there is a trend that's already underway. Israel-Palestine feeds into it, intensifies it, but it's already also there. It's been there for the last decade at least. Policing tactics, militarizing police in the USA, in the United Kingdom. So what I'm trying to say is that the global solidarity movement must also provide a lot of its own leadership. And whether, wherever they're based, they need to be part of, whether it's Black Lives Matter in the United States, fighting anti-Semitism on the streets of Germany or Amsterdam, and fighting for, preserving working class benefits or whatever it might be. It's a huge range, but I just mean that we have to evolve and develop our own leadership. And that's, I'm talking in the context of global solidarity with Palestine. It has to also be sort of auto-led. It has to be part of other movements and to find its own leadership and its own models. Because if people are looking, I don't want Palestine to be exceptionalized. That people who get up and fight for Palestine overlook genocide in Sudan, for instance. I mean, millions of people are displaced in Sudan. At least, I forget, I was listening to the panel earlier today, hundreds of thousands of people have died there in the last 2 or 3 years, and we hear almost nothing about it. Yemen, 375,000 dead since the Saudis went in 2015. We can't focus on Palestine in a way that blinds us to the rest of this, and we can't fight it all, but we have to understand the intersectionality. We have to show what solidarity actually means, to remember what solidarity is about. And yeah, again, show leadership. Each and every one of us needs to show leadership. We can't just look to the others and think, Hamas is not the leadership for those Palestinians who, in their desperation and humiliation, thought anyone who kicks our enemy in the teeth is good. They weren't. And not because they're radical or Islamist or whatever it is. All that's also a lot of nonsense. But people who want liberation have to take responsibility for their actions. They're either victims, in which case they're without agency and they accept what comes to them. I don't believe in that. I've never believed in that. But being an agent of your own freedom means taking full ethical, political responsibility for your choices and your acts, your timing, your strategy. And again, Palestinians have to do that. They're in a horrible mess this way, but everyone who supports them needs to take on part of that leadership role.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Be brief, please.
Sorry, took your time.
Just like building on everything Yezid said, and the first thing you started with, that's why we don't talk about peace. Because we talk about ceasefire because we think that it's attainable. But peace, you need to solve all of this and more, and you need also to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So that's why there is no talk of peace.
Very quickly, because I know it's a coffee break. So there were 3 points. One, I completely agree with you that unfortunately the concept of peace has been degraded. You know, at home people talk about normalization. I have been teaching peace for 31 years and I explain, I don't expect between Israelis and Palestinians positive peace. John Lennon, you know, the yellow submarine. Negative peace, meaning the absence of war, will be more than enough. The second point, disagree with you, but we can continue over coffee. I don't think that you have a genocide. I think that there are clear cases of war crimes. In the last month, the IDF is investigating 16 cases regarding northern Gaza, but we can argue about that. I'm sure that what Hamas did on October 7, 2023, there were genocidal elements there. And the third point that relates to other panels, and I think Natalia Tocci and Udo Jude Ilo, and you mentioned that he was referring to what's going on in Sudan. Everything is interrelated. So we have to pay attention, and in the Global South, I guess at the G20, etc., they are complaining about those double standards. But we also have to be aware of stereotypes, because if you take Latin America, you take Africa, you will see not everybody follow Colombia or Turkey, you know, demanding at the ICJ genocidal actions. It's much more complicated than that. But there are double standards there. I'm aware of that. And again, we have to be aware it's not just Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, there are other things. I'm not demeaning, I'm not saying that's not an issue. And if I have the last word, I assume. So I'm really happy about sharing this panel with the two of you, because with the three of us or the four of us, because I think that's, in a sense, we are delivering about the message of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you all for listening to us. Thank you.